Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back to Misinformation in Science and Society. Here to listen, not to judge. I'm your host Annie, and today with us we have Gale Sinatra. Alright, welcome. So could you please introduce yourself a little bit and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Gale Sinatra, and I'm the Stephen Crocker Chair and Professor of Education and Psychology at USC, University of Southern California. I'm in the Rossier School of Education. And my research is on science understanding and the public understanding of science.
Yeah. So could you share with us like how you got into this field?
Sure. So I always loved science. And I thought about being a scientist, but I ended up a psychologist in education. And I was doing a research study about how college students understand text, just text that they're reading in schools. And I picked an evolution text.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was just interested in the topic of human evolution, and I was really stunned by a lot of the concerns that students expressed and the misunderstandings, and mostly strong emotions, a lot of strong emotions. And it really got me interested in the idea that understanding science is not the same for everybody. And I started to look at the reasons that people doubt, resist, deny, or struggle to understand science. And so I've been researching that for quite a long time.
Yeah. So how big of an issue is like motivated like reasoning when it comes to the spread of misinformation today?
Yeah, so I was very excited to see that your channel is exploring misinformation because that's such a big factor. One of the reasons that people are confused about, whether, GMOs would or could kill you, and whether, vaccines cause autism, or whether climate change is a hoax, is because that's what they're told. They hear a lot of misinformation through social media, through news media, through online media, through all politicians, all sorts of people who spread misinformation about science. And so it is a huge factor. And you mentioned motivated reasoning. So I have a book on this topic. It's called Science Denial: Why It Happens and What to Do About It. And in our book, my co-author Barbara Hofer and I have a whole chapter devoted to motivated reasoning. And that is when people sort of reason towards a desired conclusion rather than reasoning towards an accurate conclusion. And we see a lot of that across different topics in science. And so that is a big factor, and we do talk about it in our book.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really I that was the first time like I heard of the term motivated reasoning when I like looked into your research and like areas of like focus. And yeah, I think that definitely yeah. And so what role do you think like emotions play in how willing someone is how willing someone is to accept a false scientific claim that like aligns with their worldview, and how can we counteract that?
Yeah, emotions work both ways. So even people who accept and understand climate change, they might have strong emotions too, like climate anxiety, which is a real issue, particularly among young people who are rightly so very concerned about the future and what the future is going to look like. So your emotions can have a really big impact on how you understand the issue, even if you are accepting of the science. But if you're more resistant to the science, the emotions you experience might be anger or frustration. And anxiety on one side or anger and frustration on the other side, all of those emotions really tend to make us want to push away from engaging with the topic, either because it's too upsetting or because it makes us angry. And that's unfortunate. So a, a lot of research shows in psychology that one way to manage anxiety about climate is to engage in climate activism or climate actions, kind of like what you're doing with your YouTube station channel. You are engaging in something productive, and what the research has shown is when you do that, it helps lessen the climate anxiety. People who are angry or hostile, it's harder to get them to lessen their negative emotions. But if they're at all open, and unfortunately they're usually not, but if they're at all open to hearing about, the actual science behind the climate, then they can have a productive conversation about it too. Sometimes they're just angry because of misinformation. So sometimes they are angry about something that isn't even true, right? So if you can help ameliorate the negative emotions that people have by dispelling the misinformation, that's one avenue to get them to be a little less negative and then maybe a little more open to hearing more information.
Mm-hmm. And so why do you think that scientific facts are like often or sometimes insufficient to change people's minds? Because I know you've written about like misinformation and like for example uh yeah, you've done research in like evolution, climate change. And so like even when people are like presented with like factual evidence and like why do you think that sometimes that's not like sufficient?
Well, one thing is some of these topics are pretty complicated and people don't really understand them. You know, CO2 is not something you can see, so people see air pollution, like if it's a, day with bad air and you see it, but you don't
Mhm.
really see CO2. And so there's this thing, we don't really see it. There's more of it than there used to be, but you don't see that. So it's confusing and hard to understand how that impacts warming. So the whole greenhouse effect, it's very confusing. So it's understandable that it doesn't necessarily make sense to people. A lot of science is not intuitive.
Mhm.
I mean, just think about the shape of the earth, right? It's a sphere, but it doesn't really look like that or seem like that to us as we walk along the earth. It seems flat. So,
Mhm.
it's these are topics that are not aligned with our firsthand experience,
Mhm.
not easily accessible. And so a lot of it can be just that they're not really familiar with the facts. And so they've kind of accepted maybe an explanation they've heard from social media, from friends on Facebook, from a video on TikTok. And then they've sort of hunkered down with that idea. And so then they become resistant to hearing alternative ideas. And there's also sort of a social aspect to this. It's kind of like what your identity group believes you tend to believe. So if all your friends on social media are saying that climate change is a hoax, then you're probably going to think climate change is a hoax because that's what you're hearing. So a lot of it can be that you become resistant to facts because either you don't understand them, you've heard a lot of misinformation, or your identity group is telling you that that's a bunch of nonsense, and so you don't really process it or think about it.
Mhm. And since I know you're an educator, and so what advice would you give to like a young person like me or like a student who wants to like identify and avoid spreading misinformation on like either social media or like just real life and or not like just like in like offline, online, everything.
Yeah, so the first thing is that we all have a tendency to read clickbait headlines and then think they're interesting, funny, silly, scary, whatever, and then just share the story. So So the first step is don't do that. We
Mm.
all do it, but we should resist doing that. You should open the article, take a look at it, and then you should do something called lateral reading. So this is what fact checkers do. So when you Google something, you kind of read down the page and all the different links that come up. That's vertical. What fact checkers do is they read laterally, which means they've clicked on a story, they've looked at that story, but now they open another window. And in another window, they look up the author, or they look up the site that's posting this information, or they look for some other news organization that's saying the same thing or different things. So in other words, by opening up another window, you can fact check whether, are other people saying that? Or who are these guys? Are they making money? Are they known to be a misinformation spreader? Are they the only people saying this? Are other people saying this? So when you look in a new window, it's called lateral reading, you can start to do some fact checking on whether that story has any legitimacy. And only then, if you find that it does, should you share it. Now, that sounds like it's going to take forever, right? Like a half an hour, all this research. But actually, if you get good at this strategy, it definitely really takes a couple of minutes, usually, to discover that something is not quite right about that story. And if it isn't, then you shouldn't share it. And then if you feel like, oh, it seems like a legit story, share it and tell people why you think it's legit or why you think it's not legit. In other words, don't just share something without saying, I looked this up and it said that this was from a science article, or I looked this up and it said that this isn't true because it's not, these people have a hidden agenda. So it's best not to share anything that isn't true. But if you do share something, make sure you say whether or not you've vetted that it's true or not true from other means of investigating that by opening up another window and reading a little bit more about who these people are and why they're saying what they're saying and whether they have any financial or political motive.
Mm-hmm. Those were all my questions about misinformation. I have just like a few more, three more, just like for fun. But do you have anything else to add about misinformation and specifically like with your focus, with your like angle, um, before I ask the last few questions?
Yeah, one thing I would just want to say about misinformation is it's just flooding the zone, right? So you just see so much of it, you get, inured to it. You just, kind of get like, you don't believe anything anymore, right? And don't get like that. So don't let the flood of misinformation, make you feel like, oh, nothing can be trusted. There's no good information. You can never find out what's true. Now, it does take, as we just talked about, a little extra effort. But it isn't the case that there's no good information out there. It isn't the case there's no trustworthy scientific information out there. You do need to learn how to find it, and it does take some practice, but with a little bit of practice, you can start to sort out more the misinformation from the more scientifically legitimate information.
Yeah, so we should be like optimistic and like proactive. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the misinformation spreaders rely on us not using our reflection, but rather just clicking and sharing.
mhm.
They rely on us sort of automatically doing that without stepping back and thinking, is this real? Is this true? So when we just click and share, we're really just perpetuating the misinformation. So we can be a part of decreasing misinformation spread by being more careful about what we share.
Mhm. All right. So, my last three questions. The first one is just, um, I know like you have your book, and is there any other like projects or initiatives, either current or future or like recent past that you would like to share about?
Yeah, so one of the things I'm really interested in right now is AI.
Hmm.
So, Chat GPT and these other AI ways to look for information. We wrote an article in The Conversation, which is a online newspaper, about the fact that that can really be a misinformation spreader. So we all are excited to play with ChatGPT and Bard and all these other AI platforms to see the fun things they can do. They can create poems for your friend for her birthday. They can do all sorts of cool things, but we would say, my co-author Barbara Hofer and I would say, be cautious about using them to look for accurate science information, because they actually aren't usually working the way a search engine works. So if you ask a scientific question to Chat GPT, before you accept that answer is legit, we would hope that you would go do a little work looking that up first, because the way those AI algorithms work is they're basically just linguistically predicting a good answer. They're not really finding necessarily an accurate answer.
Hmm. And the second one was what inspires you like in life, whether that's like a person, idea, book, etc.
Well, I recently met with some youth climate activists at a conference, and I found them very inspiring. So I am very excited about how active and involved and engaged young people are in the climate movement, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Hmm. And the last one is what advice do you have, like just general advice, for people, especially like teens?
Well, I think one thing to avoid is sort of the doomerism. So you hear a lot of people saying it's too late to do anything about climate change. So, you know, doesn't matter. It's all terrible. Everything's awful and it's only going to get worse. I think that's not right and accurate. Most climate scientists say that's not true. There's lots that we can do that will make significant differences. But it's also sort of a bad place to be, right? So psychologically, if you feel like everything is doomed, it's discouraging and depressing, and it sort of leads you away from taking actions that are productive, um, and more healthy as well. So I would say my advice is to avoid doomerism, be positive, take actions, you'll feel better and you'll contribute to making the planet more habitable for us in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. That's definitely great advice. And just thank you for this whole interview and for your time and insights. It's really nice talking to you.
It's great talking to you, Annie, and I really appreciate what you're doing, trying to help people understand the role of misinformation in science. It's so important. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right. I hope you have a good rest of your day. And
Thank you.
yeah, take care.
Take care.